Analysis of the stalemate in Abkhazia. And the game plan here is to give you sort of a 2-minute stylized version of the case, and then sort of a 10,000-foot flyover of the model, sort of where I can highlight a few of the key elements here. So the main things that I'm going to want to hit are sort of the way in which I'm able to apply a strategic bargaining model to explain why settlement in Abkhazia, why a lack of settlement in Abkhazia is rational, and why the stalemate is likely to remain stable. And then I'm able to characterize a potential negotiated settlement and explain the conditions under which that's possible to achieve, and then suggest directions for future research, which would be focused on how actors in stalemates are able to learn and update their beliefs over time. So, give you guys a bit of a map to orient you here. So this is Georgia, which was formerly the Soviet Socialist Republic of Georgia. At that time, Abkhazia was a subordinate region within that SSR. And the ethnic Abkhaz at the end of the Soviet era represented only 17% of the Abkhaz population. But they dominated the Abkhaz Supreme Soviet and especially local government. So they're locally very powerful. When Georgia was gaining its independence, that local dominance was threatened. So with some Russian help, they fought a successful war of secession. And since 1993, we've had a ceasefire line right here, and we've had a stalemated conflict. So the Georgians and the international community have refused to recognize Abkhaz independence, and the ensuing stalemate's been pretty costly for both sides. However, the costs have mostly landed on the Abkhaz. In recent years, Georgia has had some steady and impressive economic growth, but Abkhazia, which used to be one of the richest areas in the Soviet Union, their economy is pretty much in ruins. They're back almost to the level of subsistence agriculture. The only sort of group that's doing well there economically are the political elite, who are making a pretty good living smuggling goods around the Georgian blockade. Since '96, the Georgians have blockade in the Black Sea and along this border. Technically, what Russia is supposed to cooperate with it, they don't. But the end story is that this conflict is really economically costly to the Abkhaz public. So the approach that I take in this project is to apply some formal models to this and to attempt to get at it that way, to take what we know from sort of the formal bargaining lit and apply it to this conflict. So the key puzzle which we're trying to get at here is that in 1998 there were some UN negotiators made a big push to try and get Abkhazia to come to the table. We were going to reach a negotiated settlement. Abkhazia was going to come back into Georgia as an autonomous region. They're going to get lots of special rights. They didn't even want to sit down at the table to discuss it. And this presents something of a puzzle, given that the stalemate is so costly for the Abkhaz. So the two questions that I use this model to go through are, why don't we see settlement? And under what conditions might we see it? So I'm going to pop up a game tree for you guys here, for those of you that like formal things. So here the two players are the Georgian elite and the Abkhaz elite, are the two players modeled up here. I also in the paper go through the incentives facing the Georgian public and the Abkhaz publics. I'm going to more or less bracket that for now, but the decisions the publics make are either to support or oppose the incumbent elite. So the players actually bargaining over division of control of Abkhazia are the Georgian elite and the Abkhaz elite. So in the first round you get a Georgian offer of some level of control that they would retain and some level that the Abkhaz would receive. Or they can choose to initiate a return to civil war. In the next round, the Abkhaz can either accept the Georgian offer, in which case we receive settlement, they can reject it and make a counteroffer, or they can initiate a return to war. And this is sort of an iterated bargaining over an indefinite period of time. To briefly discuss the war option, without going into it in too much detail, the way that sort of incentives are aligned with international actors, it's pretty clear that the expected payoff from war for both players is strictly lower than their expected payoffs from stalemate. So the war option doesn't end up playing a very large role in this analysis. The two explanations of stalemate that I'm going to hit that come out of sort of this formal approach. The first is divergent incentives between the Abkhaz elite and the Abkhaz public. I mentioned that the Abkhaz elite are making a pretty good living smuggling goods around the Georgian blockade. It's unclear whether the profits they make from that are actually greater than those that they lose from sort of the overall economic damage to the region, but it is clear that their costs of stalemate are a lot lower than the public costs of stalemate. So that makes it pretty rational for them to drive a harder bargain than the public might prefer them to. The second story is a story of credible commitment. The Abkhaz are in what James Fearon calls a sons of the soil predicament. If a deal is struck with the Georgian government in which Abkhazia comes back within Georgia as an autonomous region, we're likely to see a steady reverse migration of all the Georgians that were displaced during the conflict. And in short order, the Abkhaz are going to be back to minority status, and then under any form of sort of representative government or whatever, you're going to see them demographically swamped. They're going to lose control of the region. So those are two sort of individually sufficient causes why stalemate is very rational, even though it's costly. So that moves us sort of to the second stage of this, which is what might a stalemate or what might a settlement agreement look like? How could we reach it? One answer is sort of to take sort of the Barbara Walter line, which is we can get a third-party guarantor in. They can help us solve our problems of credible commitment. Right? We can get an enforcer for these agreements. The Georgians could arrange to directly compensate the Abkhaz elite for their lost smuggling revenues. We set them up with high-paying civil service posts. We try and address the demographic problem by either restricting reverse migration by ethnic Georgians or maybe limiting the enfranchisement of returned IDPs, something along those lines. And we get to an agreement that's mediated either by the UN or something like this. The problems with this are pretty obvious, right? The US and Russia are incredibly neutral, nor is the CIS or NATO. UN doesn't really have the interest or the capacity, and it's hard for the UN to credibly commit to do things like maintaining plum civil service jobs for ex-secession leaders and limiting the franchise of returned IDPs. Those aren't things that the UN can really credibly commit to do. So the conclusions I reach in this project are not optimistic. I include that the conflict's only likely to settle when one side's willing to concede unilaterally, which is that they're willing to settle without extracting a promise from the other side to do much that the other side wouldn't care to do anyway. So either the Georgians need to let the Abkhaz go completely, or the Abkhaz desire for an improved economic situation gets so strong that they're willing to accept life as a minority group in Georgia. So the last sort of thing I'm going to touch on here is sort of the directions for future research and trying to get at the question of how do you get to a stalemate, or how do you break a stalemate over time? How might a side get to the point where it's willing to make this type of unilateral concession? And to do that, we need different informational assumptions. The model I work with, sort of in the bulk of the paper, trying to explain why this stalemate is rational, is a standard bargaining model in which we assume complete and perfect information. So we know everything what our payoffs are in every stage going forward based on what our different options are. And if that's true, any agreement that we might reach 5 years from now, we could reach more productively today. Any of these solutions unravel and you get this stationary no delay equilibrium where you get an offer and it's accepted in the first round, right? That's sort of the standard bargaining outcome. So to get away from that and understand how we can get sort of settlements at later times during the conflict, we have to incorporate ideas of imperfect information and learning. So one way to deal with imperfect information is simply to visualize a move by nature between every round of bargaining, right? So the Georgians make an offer, it's rejected, the Abkhaz make a counteroffer, then some set of external events occurs, and we have another round. And these events lead players to update their beliefs and revise their expectations upward or downward. So I'm just going to run through one example of how that might work here. So if the Abkhaz are sitting back in October of this year saying, you know what, we believe that if the Kosovars are given some independence and they're internationally recognized, that's going to set off a chain reaction. A lot of secessionist groups are going to get recognized. We're going to get recognized too. So then the Kosovars get their independence. The Abkhaz are going to, in response to that external event, the Abkhaz say, hey, look, they got their independence, we're next. We're really optimistic about our payoffs from stalemate. They actually look really good. So they're going to take a harder stance at the negotiating table. They're going to demand more. Then maybe another year goes by. They say, hey, looks like nobody is going to recognize us. This hasn't set off this chain reaction. Maybe we never will get recognized. Boy, we had a bad year in crops this year, things are looking really bad. We're going to revise our expectations downward about our payoffs from stalemate, and a settlement looks more attractive. We're going to be willing to accept sort of a less favorable bargain. So as players revise their beliefs over time, we may get to a point where both players are willing to accept the same, are able to reach an agreement. So that's the future direction for this research. I would like to be able to generate some hypotheses about the exact types of external events that are likely to get players to revise their beliefs in ways that are likely to break stalemates. And then those are hypotheses you could take out and test cross-nationally. So that's the future direction this project is going. Thanks very much.